Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Three Questions With. This time, I'm really pleased to have Howard Jones with me, who was actually recommended by a mutual contact, David Quainton, who we should give a shout out to. Howard is a fractional communications director, and I'm excited to get into that and what that means, to hear a bit about your career and take from there.
Thanks so much, James. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Pleasure. So let's go straight into it. Let's start with that awful cocktail party question of, so what do you actually do?
Yeah, and the answer really is one that's designed to preclude any further conversation, in my experience, because invariably of speaking to somebody who will be able to take that conversation further and to a point where you can actually get into some of the detail and the mechanics and the nuances and the fun of it is extremely unlikely. You're much more likely to stumble across somebody who has an extremely strong opinion about the media, about the BBC, about Trump, about spin. You know, you're more likely to hit Alistair Campbell type comments within a few minutes than you are to hit about how comms solved business challenges.
Yeah, it's a really good point.
So there's, to a large extent, I try to just gloss over it. I wish my dinner party answer was more optimistic and positive.
Well, talk about this world of fractional, and I think it's a really interesting space to be in.
Absolutely. And that's a side of things where perhaps more than the thing that I do, people are much more interested in how I do it. So the notion of fractional work and the manner in which that differentiates from part-time work is something that people are really fascinated by. Because, you know, if you're a consultant, I think people understand that feels like something that they get, but usually you're working for a larger firm. Fractional, that's something that's quite relatively new, certainly new to most people. So that's something that's been genuinely interesting, getting people really engaged in, okay, well, what does that mean? What does that really mean? There's a cynicism, but actually when you just explain that what you're doing is you're providing a service that people probably can't afford and or don't need full time. You're providing a service that suits what the employer needs, as opposed to forcing a case of, well, if you want a communications director, that's, you know, a big salary and a big commitment. Being able to say, you know what, you need that level of expertise, but maybe you only need it on a small part-time basis. Kind of opens up whole new levels of opportunity for typically smaller employers and new opportunities for me, because I get to work for a range of different businesses, solving all sorts of different problems in different industries, as opposed to, you know, one set of problems, one company, you know, one industry.
And there's two things you hear from people all the time. When people get to a certain stage with the same organization, it's that, it's got a bit cyclical. I could kind of do it standing on my head. And the other thing you hear is people making hires into big roles and realizing about 18 months down the line that the job's done. I don't really need you anymore. And I think there's been it's almost been a taboo subject that actually we could just hire somebody for a period of time to deliver that senior counsel that we need and that kind of structural piece, and then send them on their merry way.
I think you're absolutely right. And that first point you made about the cyclical nature of it, I think that's one of the biggest problems with comms teams, comms structures. I think there's an awful lot of behavior in comms, which is it comes down to the, why am I doing the thing that I'm doing? What's the activity that I'm doing and why? And the answer to that is often because I did it last year, because it's the thing that we do, because it's on the calendar. Often it's because, well, there's a team of 10 people here and we've got to all be busy. And the answer should be because I'm solving a particular problem. What it shouldn't be is because that's what we do.
Yeah.
And I genuinely think that there is a behavior embedded in in-house comms teams that is just rinse and repeat. Be busy. And I'm not saying they're not busy, but be busy because you've got to show that you're busy. Be busy and do the same thing we always do. And I have a big problem with that, because I think if you can't answer the question of why you're doing something, then it's probably a bit of a waste of time, money, effort, and it doesn't help anybody.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes that attitude or behavior is what damages the function, because you then got me as comms director having to present to the board what we're doing, and it's not actually having any meaningful impact. And so,
why would they value it? So the quality of work generally goes down because you're not really driven by solving a particular problem. And you're right, you can't communicate the value of what you did. And the value of what you did gets dumbed down then into some really dry, particularly in PR and earned media in particular, as the kind of the key output. I mean, earned media is the facet of communications that no other team in the business wants, right? No other team wants earned, because earned really, really hard bit. But when earned media, when the output becomes volume of coverage or reach, you're just on a race to the bottom. You can't possibly win. You're up in the boardroom. You're up against metrics that have been developed over the last 15 years or so by performance marketing. Now, I don't believe in the vast majority of performance marketing driven metrics. I think they are all nonsense, but they've won the boardroom. They've established a language, currency. And if you can't play along, if you can't speak that language and you can't compete in that currency, then you're going to be nowhere. But the reality is you can't really speak that language because that language is nonsense. What you can do is align yourself to real problems and real opportunities. And that way, you don't have to play the silly nonsense game of talking in metrics. Actually, you come in with, I'm fully engaged at the top of this business. I understand the problem that we're facing, the barrier we've got to overcome, or the opportunity we're seeking to grasp. And I've created an environment for you in which you can achieve that, overcome that, deliver that. That's what you should be doing. In comms, you should always be thinking about working on the environment in which your business is operating.
So much of that feels like it actually boils down to the language you choose to speak to the board in, right?
If you can own earned media, and you can own reputation, and you can own crisis, if you can own those three things, you'll be set for life. No one's going to want your job, right? And no one's going to want that job because those three jobs are pretty awful. You can't comms yourself out of trouble anymore. I've been saying that for 10 years, but there was a time in the early 2010s when you probably still could, to a certain extent, comms your way out of trouble. I think now what you need to do is comms your way into not getting into trouble.
Yeah.
That's probably one of the worst sentences I've ever constructed, but you get the point, right? You comms your way into not making that mistake.
Yeah, and one of our previous guests talked about that as comms being the bridge between the organization and the outside world, and that's the same sort of thing where it's actually if you don't want to get into trouble in the first place, best way to do it is to not exist in your own bubble all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's right, and I think again an interesting extra benefit that the notion of being fractional can offer, because you're somewhere between. You're not in-house. You're not fully embedded in the business to the point where actually you're really bound up in it. You're within the politics of it.
Yep.
And are actually limited in some respect to the kind of feedback that you can give. It's very difficult. People talk about, comms is the sort of conscience of the business, and that requires standing up to people and reflecting, that's the wrong decision to make. That's 100% true. It's also extremely difficult to actually do. That's a brave old thing to do, to consistently be the alternative voice. It shouldn't be taken for granted. So actually, there's this thing in fractional where you're in the business, you are part of it, but you're not necessarily bound up in some of the politics. And it is easier as a known external voice to be able to challenge, because you're not employed there.
Yeah.
And it does really make a difference.
When there's comfort in that, even if you're a permanent comms director and you're bringing someone like you in who would be potentially even more experienced or as experienced as I am, it's actually almost the good cop, bad cop scenario that you created.
There's so true, right? And media training is a really, really good example. Comms teams I've been part of would be extremely capable of media training the senior spokespeople or frontline spokespeople that we needed to take out with a big story. But we hire external media trainers. We hire external media trainers because it's easier for them to say the things that we know the CEO doesn't want to hear. And the CEO is, in turn, far more receptive to those truths from a third party.